back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. Fellas, it's draft week. We're going to have a lot of discussion about the 2025 NFL Draft. Quite a few Bulldogs we expect to hear their names called over the course of 3 days at the end of this week. We're going to talk Georgia basketball. We're going to talk about Georgia baseball as well a little bit later on. But we've got to start, fellas, with the news from Sunday night. And, man, it was back to back for the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia adding 3 players from the transfer portal. Army outside linebacker Elo Medozi, Illinois running back Josh McCray, Miami defensive tackle Josh Horton. All real positions of need, especially from depth, but especially when you look specifically at outside linebacker. That was a position we knew Georgia really needed, and they go fill it with the number 2 player in the portal this spring behind only Nico Iamaleava. Elo Medozi, a very exciting addition, as well as the other 2 guys that Georgia has added. So I'll start with you, Ben. Just general thoughts on these 3 guys that Georgia added and what you make of them joining the Bulldogs during the summer months.
Yeah, it had to be a complete coincidence that it all happened at the same time on Sunday night, right? Well, for starters, with Elo, how did we do the last name?
The way I've heard it on his film is Medozi. So I'm saying it until we get to him and he can correct the record.
No, I think you've nailed it the whole time. If that's where it's at, that's what I think you said last week as well. So good on you. I think right there is where you have to start, because it's the number one question that needed to be answered for Georgia in the transfer portal was athletic, productive outside linebacker. And it's not easy for Georgia to sell that position, I don't think, just because of what you're asked to do in Georgia's defense and the limited number of snaps that go around for that outside linebacker group in Georgia's defense. And so it's not surprising to me that it's a guy from Army that kind of fit the identity of what Georgia was looking for. Like it makes sense. I don't think you got to worry about any ego or anything like that coming into your football program. And then you throw on the film, it's easy to see why so many scouts are in love with this dude. Like, he's twitchy, athletic, long. I can't remember exactly what his wingspan was that he measured in at Georgia, but I want to say it was 82 plus, maybe 83 plus. So just super long, impressive athlete. And I think that was a question that Georgia really just needed answered. You know, the defensive line, it's clear Georgia wants to beef up the numbers there. And so I don't even think they're looking for productivity as much as they're looking for bodies that they think could have develop and have a chance. And then once we saw Branson Robinson hit the portal, I think we knew that Georgia was going to be looking at running back after Trevor Etienne leaves when they weren't expecting him to necessarily. And then Branson Robinson hits the transfer portal. Roger Robinson continues to be injured, but there's not a whole lot of experience beyond that. Josh McCray is a big body. It's weird. Georgia's got 2 of these 230-pound plus type running backs now with him and Roger Robinson, and you pair that with the twitchiness of Nate Frazier, the pure speed of Dwight Phillips, obviously what we've seen in short doses from Chauncey Bowens and Bo Walker. But I think it's a fascinating running back room now, and that what I assume will be a 1-2 punch of Nate Frazier and Josh McCray. It's just an interesting complementary back set that Georgia has now at running back.
Josh McCray, a Cheez-It Bowl MVP. When you got that kind of talent in the portal, you got to go get it and make it a priority. But you hit on the big thing for me, especially with running back. I think you pair those 2 guys together. There's a lot to be excited about. And I had a story on Monday afternoon really looking at Elo Medozi. We'll have one on Tuesday focused on Josh McCray. Kipp, what are your thoughts on these 3 guys joining Georgia and just what we can expect from them going forward?
I mean, this is what we projected Georgia to go after, right? I think getting a pure edge guy, a guy that can also play off ball, similar. I mean, kind of reminds me body style of Azeez Ojulari, but just again, a guy that can be utilized like Jalen Walker. And I just think that we knew that the edge position was, at the top of the list. We knew they probably needed to get multiple body types just to give themselves the needed depth. But then the other guys aren't a surprise either. Like defensive tackle, they're going to take a defensive tackle if they can get a guy in there they think can help them out not just this year, but moving forward, just multi-year depth. And then at running back, I think last year kind of showed everyone why they need to have more depth at position, because they went into the season thinking they had Roderick and Branson Robinson and really got, very little from both of those guys, and ended up going from Thunder and two sets of Thunder and Lightning to just having two sets of Lightning, and so now you bring in a guy like McCray that I tweeted that he reminded me of Danny Ware, just a guy that AB gap, he's going to get you 4 yards. And I think everyone's kind of looking at overall Illinois, how is that going to translate to the SEC? I look at it as they didn't have that type of running back at all in the offense last year, and they just had to throw out basically a huge chunk of the playbook. Just imagine what the adjustments they had to make in the red zone, short yardage situation. Anyone who was surprised by how much Cash Jones was used last year, I mean, that's them having to call an audible, in their playbook. So definitely bringing in a guy like McCray, knowing that Branson Robinson's in the portal. You're hoping you get Roderick Robinson back ready for fall camp. But, you have a guy now, you can slide right in there in the depth chart. It doesn't matter if he's second or fourth. You have that guy on your roster. You have that skill set on your roster. So I think that just gives them back those pages of the playbook that they wanted to utilize last year. It's just a huge need for the roster overall. So I think that they filled their biggest needs right now. Obviously, there's still some guys in the portal that they're talking to along the defensive line, defensive end, edge position. But I think that was a huge weekend for them, and they really couldn't have had a better start to their transfer portal haul.
No doubt about it. And like Ben said, to kind of knock it out one after another, I'm sure that everybody with the coaching staff was really kind of breathing a sigh of relief to kind of have those big priorities taken care of. I'll speak briefly about the three guys. Elo Mendoza, I mean, this was a guy at one point I think was a receiver and has put on a whole lot of weight and a whole lot of bulk. Like I had mentioned a few minutes ago, I wrote about him on Monday. Really like his potential, but I kind of feel like when I talk about a guy moving from Army to Georgia, it goes to when we talk about college basketball, when you're jumping up from a mid-major to a high major. I mean, that is a significant jump. And the thing I kept seeing in his film from last season, I mean, he's just a flat out better athlete than a lot of those guys he was playing against Air Force or Temple. I mean, he was just blowing by left tackles, and that's not going to happen at this level. But you bring him in, you give him fall camp to really get acclimated and to understand what he's going to go up against. And I like his potential, but he is going to have a learning curve from making that jump from Army. And I think Ben pointed this out when he first committed. I mean, that Georgia, that coaching staff, they were salivating about adding a guy from Army. You don't got to worry about his work ethic. You don't got to worry about, is this guy going to fit in well? I think that kind of speaks for itself, him coming from West Point. Josh McCray, I've watched his film, some of his highlights, the Cheez-It Bowl against South Carolina. A really thick back who is able to bounce off tacklers. I think was the most impressive to me was just he keeps piles moving forward, man. He's got 3 or 4 defenders on him. He's going to get a couple extra yards. And to me, like Kipp pointed out, that was just something Georgia did not have last season. It was because of injury with Roderick Robinson unavailable for the majority of the year. Branson Robinson only playing about half the year. Really like that addition of Josh McCray. I think you're going to see a healthy mix of him and what is a running back room that I think has got several talented guys and several different guys we're going to see in the mix. And then Josh Horton, I think this is an addition not unlike Xavier McLeod last year, where, hey, this is a guy that's still young, hasn't played a ton. Let's roll the dice on him. Let's see how it pays off. He played at Langston Hughes. I want to say he was a teammate to Bo Hughley, Georgia offensive tackle. Let's just see if it pans out. And I think that the Xavier McLeod addition did last year, and he's a guy that I think we'll see quite a bit of in 2025. But you never know. But I think it's worth the addition. It's worth bringing in a guy that's got a lot of potential, and let's see how he fits in. All right, Kipp mentioned that, Georgia added these 3 guys, but they have been in contact with other guys, other positions they may decide to try to go after. Ben, there's been talk about Bo Atkinson, Cedric Smith, some other people out there. Are you expecting Georgia to continue pushing to add these guys? Are you expecting more additions as far as the portal goes?
Well, I mean, they'd love to add Bo Atkinson. I think if they can land him, I think it becomes more complicated once look, 3 guys committed or signed on Sunday, or it was announced on Sunday night. If they felt that they had Bo Atkinson, he would have been part of that group. And so I think it just becomes more complicated when he gets to Ohio State. I know that he's been linked to potentially taking a visit to South Carolina as well. But I just think when you don't have him locked in and signed once he leaves campus, it becomes a lot harder to eventually land him. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I don't love the chances with him the way that you would have when he was on campus over the weekend. Cedric Smith, I think, is a little bit more interesting because Georgia is probably the, most compelling option that he has. I think that Georgia really likes it. I think, he's a more of a depth interior defensive line piece. Not that Josh Horton's not. It's just Josh Horton was playing at Miami last season and Cedric Smith was playing at Alabama A&M. So just slightly different worlds. And so I think if Georgia feels like it has a spot, come the end of the portal, window being closed, I guess, what is it, the 25th? I could definitely see Georgia still adding Cedric Smith. It's possible there's other names that have entered the portal that Georgia's going to try and get on some visits here over the next couple of days that I'm not aware of yet that could be last minute potential ads. But, if I'm sitting here right now, if I feel like I'm predicting it, I think it's a coin flip whether Georgia signs Cedric Smith or not. And to me, that's probably the last move that Georgia would make in the portal. But again, 3 days still left for the portal to open. We've already seen today another guy enter the portal for Georgia. And so, it's possible numbers change between now and the end of the week too.
And to follow up on what Ben just said, the portal will close on the 25th, but that does not mean a player has to make his decision. We may be following this for the weeks that follow. Ben kind of previewed that right there. Other portal news as far as guys who have left Georgia. The news on Tuesday, defensive back Chris Pill is entering the portal. You look at some of the other guys who have entered the portal from Georgia this spring. Nitro Tuggle, he has committed to Purdue. Quite a Purdue pipeline from Athens. I still don't necessarily understand why that's happened, but there's been quite a few guys there. A guy who entered the portal last December, Michael Jackson III, also going to Purdue. We'll see what he's able to do there as well. The only other guys that have gone in the portal, Branson Robinson, Marquise Easley, have yet to announce where they're transferring. So let's talk about Chris Pill for a few minutes. Redshirt sophomore, a guy that I predicted was going to get in the mix at the safety position this spring, and I predicted he was going to be a starter at G-Day. Didn't pan out that way. He did get some run with the first team defense at safety, but you just didn't hear a ton about him in the spring. It seemed like this was going to be his opportunity if he was going to get one at Georgia to break through, and it just never seemed like he ever did. Kipp, what do you think about the Chris Pill departure and just what we've heard elsewhere with some of these other guys who have decided to leave Georgia?
Yeah, I remember he had that sub 10.5 speed. Georgia had to beat, I believe, Michigan to get him in the 2023 class. Came in, thought he was, going to play cornerback. And I think that was Fran Brown that recruited him at the time. And he wasn't able to enroll early and then got the foot injury in preseason camp. I think he just continued to kind of get behind the 8 ball a little bit. Other injuries. He had the shoulder injury, torn labrum. Those really set you back in a situation like Georgia. I mean, it's just highly competitive. And then you see Georgia bringing in the guys at safety in the transfer portal and starring. You kind of saw the writing on the wall a little bit of how big this spring was going to be for a guy like Chris Pill, knowing that, Ja'Cory Thomas is getting pushed. Jonel Aguero is getting pushed by these guys. Kirby's just not going to – he's not going to stop. He's going to continue to keep the competition going. And so, Chris gave it his all. Looked good late there in G-Day. The snaps he got in there, that's probably going to help him as far as other schools be interested. That was good film. And that's kind of another reason why you would prefer to have, as a player, the game on TV, because he probably asked Georgia if he could have that film. Can I send this to other schools and show that? And it'd be interesting, if Georgia, or if schools that don't have their games on TV, give the players that film that they can provide other teams whenever they go into the portal. I think that's just like an interesting aspect to all this, but it's just a situation where when you get down on the depth chart because of injury, sometimes it's tough for you to catch up. And so just a really talented player that I think will probably help out a Power 4 team, next season, because he is really talented. But Georgia's not messing around in the secondary. They're bringing in really, really talented players every cycle, and they're bringing in really talented players in the transfer portal. So you got to be ready to keep pushing it. And I think the injuries he was unable to overcome those.
Yeah, you said a lot of what I would have said on Chris Pill. Again, he kind of got put behind the 8 ball from the start with that injury his first fall camp. Heard a lot about him during bowl practices before that Orange Bowl against Florida State, because they desperately needed depth at cornerback, and he stepped up during practice and played, if I remember correctly, a little bit in that Orange Bowl win. And yeah, that's just sort of the price you pay when you're at Georgia and you try to get as much depth. You go in the portal, like Kipp mentioned, and bring in those transfers. You're going to have guys look around and say, okay, there's not a spot for me. There's not a starting opportunity for me here. I'm going to move on. And I put this on the Junkyard that I really like Chris Pill. I think he's going to land somewhere and have a really good career. It just didn't pan out at Georgia. And to me, he's the kind of guy that I think Georgia fans should still root for. I think he's a really talented guy, and I can never really blame a guy for looking at the situation like he did and saying, okay, there's not really a spot for me here. I'm going to move on. Ben, what do you think of the Chris Pill news? Any of the other news when it comes to guys who have decided to leave Athens?
Well, have we dropped the spring breakouts final vote yet, or can we drop that right after we do this segment?
I made the mistake of not counting that up. It was actually very competitive the last time I looked, and so maybe we can look at that as you continue going on your spiel.
No, one of those situations where the transfer portal, like Kipp said, I think was the writing on the wall for someone in the defensive backfield. I don't think it was always clear exactly who it was going to be, but I think with Ja'Cory Thomas really grabbing on to that, a lot of first team reps at safety, and Janelle Aguero latching on to first team reps at star. And then you look at the transfers that they bring in and some of the young guys that Georgia's going to have to try and get into the rotation here over the next, year plus. You can look around and fairly say, I think you could probably say the same thing for certain guys on the offensive line that maybe haven't hit the transfer portal, or maybe Marquise Easley made it easier from a numbers standpoint to justify sticking around when he departed, was that if you're a guy like Chris Pill, you have the ability to be playing at a Power 4 level. And when you're not doing that and it's starting to look gray in terms of the chances of you cracking the rotation when you would like I can understand why a guy like Chris Pill would want to look around. I thought it would have worked out between him and Georgia at some point, but again, it's not easy when you've got 85 deep of a roster where Georgia feels pretty good about everybody and they're going to be bringing in top talent to compete out of the transfer portal. It does become difficult. I'm interested to see where his next destination is. I mean, when you look at where he's from, like UNC, NC State, kind of make a lot of sense to me, him winding up at one of those two places, but that's not based on any intel of where I know things are going with his recruitment. It's just, it would make sense if that's where he was headed.
Yeah, to follow up on the vote. So there were two different votes. You had the Twitter vote, who I'm just going to call the non-football knowers. What are they doing on there? And then the Junkyard, the football knowers, the people, the men and women who live and breathe with us and eat up football over on Dawgs247.com. The Twitter vote, Kipp won at 39%. I was second, 35%, and Ben was last, 26%. Honestly, Ben, I think you kind of got shafted there.
Well, I said it on the show. I thought that y'all's teams stood up better when you went through the full list than I think y'all were giving up credit for.
And then with the ball knowers, the my people, I won the vote with 57% of the vote. That Chris Pill pick did not doom me in the poll. Ben, you were second at 25%, and Kipp was last on the board. Kipp, any comment? I was kind of surprised by that.
I think the number of incognito windows tabs you guys used over the course of the last couple weeks, I'd be fascinated to know. And now I know from hearing Jordan, who put in that community note on that Twitter poll to try to say that it was fake news. But you know what? It actually just shows how well we all drafted, the variances there, and really the spring breakouts draft. It's just always fascinating because there's just so many different players that are set up to have strong performances in the next group of starters, even more so now in the with the way the transfer portal era is. You're not waiting till year 3 through 5 for some of these guys to step into the lineup, which Kirby will love to tell you anytime you get him in front of a microphone how that's how depth is now. He's having to play kids now instead of 6th-year players. So sorry, Kirby, for that, inconvenience, but it does really well for our breakouts draft. I think all these guys are going to just have huge roles in the team this season.
Kipp figured out my strategy when we do these votes. My motto is always vote early and vote often. So, whatever you got to do. We're going to take a quick break and come back and talk about the draft, talk a little bit about Georgia basketball and Georgia baseball. Before we do that, want to plug, we have a 50% off sale at Dawgs247.com. Transfer Portal Palooza. That sale will end at midnight on Thursday night. So take advantage, 50% off. You get all the portal intel over there from not only us, but our national guys, Chris Hummer, Matt Zenitz. They do a fantastic job covering the portal. If you sign up, you get that. You get all the Georgia basketball news there. Olivia Sayer covering Georgia baseball, doing a great job there. And before you know it, guys, we'll be at Media Days getting ready for the football season. So it is a good time to sign up. All right, we're going to take a quick break and be right back. All right, fellas, Thursday night, the 2025 NFL Draft will finally get underway. That's going on up in Green Bay this year. Expecting to hear a lot of Georgia Bulldogs names called over the course of the 3 days and 7 rounds of this year's draft. A situation where I believe Georgia has 17 guys who could be drafted this year. 14 of those guys were invited to the NFL Combine. Quite a few of those guys stood out up there in Indianapolis. So I'm going to start with you, Kipp. I just want sort of your general thoughts on this class for the Georgia Bulldogs. And when it comes to this first round, the guys you're really watching from Georgia.
Yeah, I think you look at Georgia over the last couple of years, everyone's going to point to that, them setting the record with 15 players taken in the draft. That is the modern era record for players from a program selected in a draft. And this obviously gives them an opportunity to tie, possibly break that. And it does all begin with the 3 guys that we think are going to go in the first round. Jalen Walker's been a consensus top 10 overall prospect for several months. And I think that, he's a unique player because he's 6'1", 240, not a guy that you can just say is purely an edge guy, but a guy that, you'd be not taking advantage of his skill set if you don't use him on the edge as well, with off-ball linebacker qualities too. And so I think it's more of are you going to be able to maximize his skill set, which is, kind of what Georgia was faced with when they had him, finally unlocking what he can do this past season and winning the Butkus Award. I think he does go top 10. He's been projected to the Carolina Panthers at 8 for months. I think that's a great fit for him. And I think that Michael Williams is the guy that it's kind of tough to know. There's been a lot of variance I think he goes higher than a lot of people think. He's been projected around a top 20, an edge guy that physically measurables, reminds a lot of people of Trevon Walker. Been injured a lot, so it's tougher to get a good eval on him. I have him going to the Saints at number 9, right after Jalen Walker comes off the board. But we've seen projections anywhere in the mid-teens. 2021's probably the floor for him. And then Malachi Starks in the mix to be the number 1 overall safety selected. I think once you start getting into the teens, that's kind of where he could come off the board. Maybe the Dolphins at 13. I have him going to the Vikings at number 24. And I think that's kind of around where his floor is, simply because of the positional value. I think, if he's not the first safety taken off the board in the mid-teens, he could end up, getting into those 20s. That's kind of what I think happens. But again, I think that's still a pretty solid spot for him. He didn't have the season many thought he might be able to, just compared to just how he immediately made an impact at Georgia. But still a guy that can kind of do it all at the safety position, very athletic. So I still think, again, anytime you have a safety going in the first round, that means he's checked off a lot of boxes, because that's just not a position that people are drafting as high as, edge rushers, interior defensive linemen, and quarterbacks.
Yeah, looking at those guys who have a chance to go in the first round, I'm a guy between the three of those that I really feel the most confident in Malachi Starks. I think that you kind of worry with Jalen Walker. There's a lot of talk of is he kind of a tweener, which I thought, Kipp, you did a good job of pointing out. Georgia kind of ran into the issue that I think we could see in the NFL, where it's where exactly do we use Jalen Walker? Michael Williams, you just need to keep him healthy. I think if he stays healthy, he has a chance to be really special, but he struggled with that, especially his last year at Georgia. And Malachi, I think a lot got thrown on his plate his last year, them asking him to play some of the star because they didn't feel good about that position. I really think someone's going to, catch a steal and find a steal. If he's still on the board in the 20s, I think he has a chance to be really special. And you mentioned Malachi, you mentioned Michael, just a few of the mock drafts I've seen, you've kind of seen them in the 20s. I think Mel Kiper had Michael to the Detroit Lions, which honestly wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if that's where Michael ended up. And that's what I would encourage fans who watch, especially that first round. If there's a few of these Georgia guys that stay on the board longer than we expect, that's not necessarily bad news for those guys. They're still going to make money, and also they're probably ending up with teams that can contend for championships right away. It's not always the worst thing in the world for these guys to end up with a team like the Detroit Lions, like the Baltimore Ravens, like the Philadelphia Eagles, who I'm sure will draft another Georgia player or two by the time the draft is all said and done. So it'll be something to watch for sure. Ben, any thoughts on these top 3 guys, the guys that we are watching as potential first rounders from Georgia?
I don't keep up with the mock drafts to the extent that Kipp does, so I sort of defer to him on where he thinks a lot of these guys are going to be falling. It's surprising to me to hear that Michael might be slipping into the 20s. I just don't it seems to me that you're going to be hard pressed to find 20 more ready-made NFL players than Michael Williams. That's just my personal opinion on it. I agree with you completely, Jordan, on Malachi Starks, in that any team that gets Malachi Starks is getting a great player, and they're going to feel awesome about that pick. I wonder sometimes, because of the positional value of safety, where he ends up falling in the draft and whether that drops him lower, but I think, like you said, there's a great chance that Malachi Starks, if he's ending up in the back end of the first round, he's ending up inserting himself immediately into the starting rotation of a roster that already is competing for championships, which I think, would make him a perfect fit for whatever defense that would end up being. My big thing, I'm just fascinated to see Jalen Walker, where he ends up, how high he goes. He's the guy that I think has the most star potential out of everybody that Georgia has in this draft class. And so I think whoever gets him, it's going to just be fascinating to see. And I hope that he ends up at a good fit for him, just so that he doesn't have undue expectations in a place where it's not going to be realistic for him to fulfill them.
Ben, like you mentioned, like with Michael, my projection is he's going to slide a little bit in the first round, but I have the Baltimore Ravens taking him. I think that's like 27th overall. Imagine a secondary with him and Kyle Hamilton at safety. That would be unreal. And yeah, with Jalen Walker, I'm with Kipp. I have him going to the Carolina Panthers, and man, he's going to have his work cut out for him because that was a historically bad defense last year. I would encourage folks to follow along on Dawgs 24/7. I've had a lot of draft previews so far this week. They will continue, and we will continue to cover the draft once it gets going. And I want to kind of look bigger picture. Some of these later rounds, we are going to see a number of Georgia players drafted and guys who are not going to get the kind of attention that Michael, Jalen Walker, Malachi Starks are going to. I'll start with you, Kipp. Who's a guy that might be like a day 3 guy from Georgia that you're sort of like, keep an eye on this guy? In time, he may wind up being a really good NFL player.
Well, I think we got to go with the one that was the hardest for us to really project, or the one that kind of caught us off guard was, Tierney Ingram Dawkins going in the draft. It was a guy where the light started to come on and you started to say, okay, this guy's, got a lot of talent and he's starting to put it all together and making a lot of disruptive plays. And you kind of saw like what I would say is maybe half a year of NFL film. And then that was it. He declared for the draft. And you're like, okay, what kind of grade does he have? Where do we think this guy is going to go in the draft? And it's still tough to peg. I put out my NFL draft projections for all the Georgia players shortly before we went on the podcast, and I have him going 180 overall to the Las Vegas Raiders in the early 6th round. But I mean, he's a guy that I wouldn't be shocked if he goes 50 picks earlier, just because when you have 6'5", 275-pound guys that go to the combine and just blow it up, basically the most athletic profile among all the interior defensive linemen, I just think that's something that can entice any team easily. And I mean, the Raiders was, that used to be the team that was always enticed. But I think overall, just not having a ton of film on him, I felt like I kind of put right in the middle there. Early 6th round is probably where I think he goes. But Arrow pointed up, he's just oozing with upside. So I just think 3 or 4 years from now, we could be looking at a guy that's not just a above average starter, but one of the better players in NFL. And those guys usually aren't taken in the 6th round.
Getting a little arrow pointing up action on a non-stay Wolk podcast. I'm always happy to hear that. Ben, is there a Georgia player you're watching in these later rounds that you feel really confident is going to wind up sticking around in the NFL?
Well, the way you reframe that question there at the end made me sort of want to reconsider my answer, because I don't really know. But I'm fascinated to see what happens with Dan Jackson. Like, where does he get drafted? If so, where does he get drafted? He's someone similar to like what I just talked about with Malachi Starks. Like, I feel like if he ends up on a good team with a good culture and plays, like, he's going to fit in perfectly there. And he's someone that I could easily see finding way more success than people might be expecting out of him at the next level. The one, and maybe I have a soft spot for him that's at my own peril. It's my fatal flaw, but I just feel like somebody is going to watch Arian Smith film and watch him run. I know he didn't have a perfect 40 time. He didn't do exactly what he wanted, but you're going to be able to watch his film and say, man, this dude is open. Despite his issues, Georgia kept forcing him the ball throughout the course of the 2024 season. And I just feel like someone is going to end up taking a chance on Arian Smith, whether or not I think that works out for them or whether he solves some of the drop issues that he had. I don't know. And I'm not going to sit here and confidently, back my guy, but I think that Arian Smith has a chance to have a better NFL career than people think, just based on how much the way that people have talked about him and his shortcomings, which are fair. And I'm not going to deny any of those things, but I just think, he has a chance more than people think. And I don't know if someone's going to take a shot at him. I think he's currently projected to go undrafted, but he's just someone with his skill set, with some of the things he's shown on film, and obviously the pure speed. I could see someone drafting Arian Smith.
I'm with you. I think someone, even if it's in the 7th round, will take a flyer on Arian Smith, because I think he's a guy you take a chance on when you're drafting 6th, 7th round. what are you really risking there? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, now I'll add this. If I'm a Georgia guy that might be going in the 7th round, I might be asking my agent to tell everybody not to draft me just so I can go sign with the Philadelphia Eagles and I can make that choice all on my own.
Smart man. My two guys, Smile Munden. I know he's dealt with a lot of injuries. To me, that is the biggest question with him. But there was a time when Kirby Smart was saying, look, this is the most freakish, athletic inside linebacker we've coached. It was just a matter at that point of him putting it together. So if he can stay healthy, which is the biggest question mark in sports, I can see him sticking around. And I can see him not only making an NFL roster, but eventually being a contributor. And then the other guy that I don't feel like I've heard a ton about leading up to this draft process is Nazir Stackhouse. He was a guy when he came back to Georgia for the 2024 season. There were people saying, yeah, he would have been probably a day 3 pick, top 90 pick had he left after the 2023 season. Really like Nas. He's a guy that, I wrote about this, I think, multiple times during the 2024 season where he doesn't get a ton of stats. He's not going to make a ton of plays that you just ooh and ah, but he opens up lanes for the defenders around him. He gives those guys opportunities to make plays. I really like Nazir Stackhouse. Even if he's on the board for a while, I think he can be an impact guy at the next level. All right, before we turn the page from the draft, I'm going to put you guys on the spot, and I'll start with Kipp. All right, over under 11.5 Georgia players drafted. Now, this might go back to your projections that you put up on Tuesday. Are you going over or under 11.5 Georgia players getting drafted this year?
Knowing that Ben just put out the note for all the players to call their agents and tell them not to get drafted in the 7th round, I'm going to safe over. I think 14 players get drafted. And I think you could see up to 7 guys drafted in the 7th round because that's kind of where I have a lot of the grades for guys from Stackhouse, Brinson, Truss, Jurasik, Dan Jackson, and I don't think Arian and Lovett get drafted, but those are 50-50 guys. So I think it's a clear over on 11.5. I think that was one of the easier over-unders you've ever given us on this pod.
It's always hard to know where exactly to put it. And to Kipp's point, the thing I would do if I was an NFL GM, and this would not be just Georgia specific, it's when you're in the 6th and 7th round, what's a program that has established itself as a team that generates NFL talent? And, Georgia has always left the door open for GMs to come in, front office people to watch. To Kipp's point, if you're in that 6th or 7th round, let's take a Georgia guy and let's just see where he sticks. I'll go slightly over 11.5. I'm going to say 12 Georgia players get drafted. Quite a few wind up being undrafted free agents. But again, another good opportunity for a number of these guys and guys that I think will have an impact in 2025 and beyond. All right, Ben, 11.5 over under on the number of Georgia players that get drafted this year.
If Kipp says over, easy over, I'm saying over, easy over on that one. I mean, I would think 13 or 14 is where I'd be looking at, but when Kipp lays it out there, if he has all those guys, he has it at 14 with no Arian or Dom. I mean, is there a chance that they get to 15?
I think there'll be 9 guys drafted going into the 7th round. I think Tyrion will be the 9th guy after Trevor Etienne, and I think Dylan Fairchild and Smile both go in the 4th as well. So, yeah, you just need 3 guys to be drafted in the 7th round to hit the over. And I think there's, again, like I said, up to 8 guys that could hear their name called in the 7th.
8 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday night. That will be the start of the draft. Follow along with us on the Junkyard over at Dawgs247.com. We will have all the coverage as these Georgia guys get drafted. We'll give our thoughts, and I'm sure on Sunday we will do our superlatives of where guys ended up and what we think of what they got going forward. Georgia men's basketball minute. Not a lot really on the Georgia front. Georgia has pushed really hard for some guys in the transfer portal. Swung and missed on a few names. They've got, I believe, 3 open roster, open scholarships at this point as they put the pieces together for the 2025-2026 season. The name to watch right now is point guard Caden Lewis. This is a 4-star point guard from Washington, D.C., a guy that was committed and I believe had signed with Kentucky Kentucky starts kind of going around in the transfer portal. Caden decides to open it back up, 6'2", 170. Visited Georgia on Monday, which I confirmed, and I know some of our national people had reported as well. This would be a big get for Georgia, but it's going to be difficult. I believe Villanova is looking at a Caden Lewis, a few other names as well. To me, and Ben, I like your thoughts. I think point guard is the biggest need right now on this Georgia roster. If they were able to swing getting a Caden Lewis, kind of following the blueprint that they took last year, where they got Santos Surreal, a Kentucky signee who opened things back up. To me, if you get a Caden Lewis, I think you should feel really good if you're Georgia.
Well, and I think this is also the transfer portal, basketball transfer portal market is insane right now. Like you've heard people say it time and time again, but it is crazy. And I think that Georgia took some swings, to your point, in the portal. I mean, Ian Jackson is the one that comes to mind, where you get him on campus and he ends up signing with St. John's, which I don't think shocks anybody. But I think that the dollar amount that one gets to probably makes people very, very uncomfortable when you're talking about a likely 1 year type of guy. And I think when you bring, you have someone like a Caden Lewis that comes on the market when you're not expecting him, it's more palatable. And I think it's someone that you feel like you can get into your program and develop a little bit as well. So I will say, I think it's at a point now where Georgia's just got to find a way to add him, because you just need some kind of playmaking ability at point guard. I don't think they would have preferred it not to be an incoming true freshman, but if that's who it is, like, that's fine. And, I think that you've added some other skill players in the portal that makes it a competitive team heading into next season. Whether it's a competitive enough to satisfy, the interests of Georgia fans, I don't know. I think that, like we've said time and time again, this is a show me year for Mike White in terms of what his basketball program is going to be.
Yeah, and to the point I was making a few minutes ago about Santos Real, Georgia's done a good job of getting other guys who were signed elsewhere. Silas Emery Jr. was originally signed with USC. Blue Kane was originally signed with Georgia Tech. So this would be a path that Georgia has taken in the past. And to Ben's point, you're kind of taking a risk with getting a guy out of high school versus a transfer. But a lot to like with the Caden Lewis, but you just have to put it together. I know that Georgia fans on the board really excited to hear the names like Ian Jackson. Hasn't been a ton of smoke to this point with Darian Reed, but Georgia was at least mentioned somewhat in that conversation. But you do have to land some of those guys. Being in the mix isn't enough. Kipp, what do you think about the option there with Caden Lewis and just where this Georgia roster is at this point?
You get talent any way you can get it, and I get it. I mean, it'd be great for Georgia to have some experience in the position, but they're trying to take another step and can keep the trajectory moving forward. And I mean, they just had the best player on their team be a freshman, and it got them to the tournament. So reload with the guys you have coming back. If they can land him and have a freshman point guard running, but have a guy with a lot of talent and a true point guard at the position, still think that's an improvement over last year. And I mean, if you can fix your biggest issue with experience, sure. But right after that, I mean, talent, that's the next best thing, and arguably better, because now you're able to mold him into the kind of player you want to lead your program, and it increases your chances of being able to have him on your roster for multiple seasons. So I think it's an opportunity for Mike White. He's running out of options to be able to get the offseason grades that we would give him, as far as B, A, anywhere in that range. But that would definitely qualify. I think it's been a solid offseason so far. They've been able to bring in scoring, most of all efficient three-point shooters. So you've given yourself an opportunity to fix one of the biggest issues, fix the other one, and we'll be singing the praises while also putting as much pressure on you as possible to take this team to the next level.
To Kipp's point, if there's one thing I think Georgia has upgraded to this point, it's its three-point shooting. They've gotten some guys, Cannon Catchings, Justin Bailey, who can shoot really well from deep. Stay glued to Dawgs247.com. We will have all of the coverage with what is going on with the basketball team. All right, Georgia baseball, Olivia Sayer going to pop on in a second to talk about a pretty tough series in Nashville for Georgia. Dropped 3 games, was swept by Vanderbilt on the road. Georgia now 33-9 overall. Here is Olivia's breakdown of what went wrong against Vanderbilt.
I would recap Georgia baseball series at Vanderbilt. In case you missed it, the Bulldogs were swept by the Commodores, who were ranked 19th at the time. I believe they have gone up a little bit, maybe to 9 in D1 baseball, not quite sure. But they were actually outscored by a score of 21-10, so it was not a very good weekend for Georgia. Fun fact, the home team between Georgia and Vanderbilt has actually now swept the last 3 meetings, so maybe there's something there, but let's dive into it. I kind of alluded to it in my intro, but the biggest thing that stood out to me about Georgia during this series was the fact that it really couldn't hit. And that's kind of stating the obvious a little bit. You look at the numbers. Game 1, it had 1 run on 5 hits after Slade Alford hit that leadoff home run, didn't score again. Game 2, 7 runs on 7 hits, kind of more consistent with what we've seen from this offense. Game 3, 2 runs on 5 hits for a total of 10 runs on 17 hits in the entire 3-game series. And that's not like this Georgia offense. Usually you see it put up those big numbers. You see it sometimes jump on teams early, really capitalize on the free passes. But this weekend, it only had 7 walks and 3 hit by pitches the entire 3-game series. So it didn't really take those free passes, and it also struck out a lot. 40 strikeouts across the 3 games. And the thing about the strikeouts is Georgia wasn't really chasing as bad as we've seen earlier in the season. Like you look at that Texas series, I believe Wes Johnson said Georgia chased 30% where Texas chased 19%. But against Vanderbilt, it was more so that the Bulldogs just really couldn't hit what Vanderbilt was throwing. Especially you look in that Game 3, what that Game 3 Vandy starter was doing. His stuff wasn't overpowering. His fastball was sort of 87, 88 miles per hour, but what he was doing is he was throwing it up in the zone, and Georgia couldn't catch up to it. They were late on it, they were missing it, they couldn't hit it. So that's definitely an area that I think they're going to work to improve upon. And look, I think Georgia's offense, at the end of the day, when the entire season's said and done, I think it's going to be fine. This season, it has had the tendency, when you look at all of the road games, maybe with the exception of Florida, but not really sure how good of a squad Florida has this year, but it's had the tendency to go quiet on the road. You look at that Texas series, now that Vanderbilt series. Even at the start of the year against a really good UNCW team, it got held quiet in that series finale. So I just think it's a matter of being comfortable at its home ballpark. This team is built to win at Foley Field. When you look at the short right porch, you look at all the power hitters within the lineup. But in order to succeed on the road, it's going to have to reduce that strikeout rate, which Georgia actually leads the SEC. Well, I guess it would be 16th in the SEC, but it has the most strikeouts right now. And Missouri is sitting right behind it at number 15. And looking at Missouri's season, I believe it's 0-18 in conference play right now. Anywhere next to Missouri in the rankings is not exactly where you want to be statistical-wise, so Georgia definitely needs to clean up that strikeout rate, especially when it has runners in scoring position. It didn't have that many opportunities this past weekend, but looking at the numbers once again, 3 for 17 with runners in scoring position, and 6 for 31 with runners on base. And you look at Vandy was 10 for 22 with runners in scoring position and 5 for 44 with them on base. But in Game 2, it was 7 for 10 with runners in scoring position and 8 for 16 with them on base. So definitely a big difference there, and Georgia just really needs to cut down those strikeouts when it has those runners on base. It's the old adage of get them on, get them over, get them in. So wrapping up with some pitching, Georgia's pitching staff, its starting rotation specifically, is really starting to round into form a little bit. We saw it against Arkansas, and it continued against Vanderbilt. Brian Gurley had another solid start on Thursday night. I do think he was left in just a tad bit too long. I believe he was 4 pitches off a career high when he went back out there for the 7th. Vanderbilt started hitting him a little bit. You look at his stat line, gave up 3 hits on the evening, 2 of which were in the 7th. Gave up 2 runs, both were in the 7th inning, so probably left in a tad bit too long, but still another solid start from him. Colton Smith on Friday did get hit a little bit. I think he'll bounce back. I'm not too concerned about that. Then Leighton Finley on, I guess it would be Saturday, was the series finale, because it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, yeah. So Leighton Finley on Saturday, another solid start for him. He's really starting to turn it around after a rough start to the season. Probably had maybe 1 to 2 pitches that he would like back when you look at that home run late, and then the walk that he issued before that. But Georgia's starting rotation with Curley, Smith, and Finley is starting to show that it can be counted on and it can provide length, which definitely helps the bullpen, just looking at guys within the bullpen knowing that, hey, this guy's on the mound today, I'm likely not coming in until the 6th inning at the earliest. And also, if Georgia's starting rotation can continue to provide that length and continue to turn in solid starts, that will be massive going down the stretch and into the potential postseason. So looking ahead, Georgia will actually travel to number 2 Clemson on Tuesday night for an 8 p.m. first pitch on ESPNU. I will be there, so stay tuned for some coverage of that game, and then it will welcome Oklahoma for a 3-game series Thursday, Friday, Saturday at Foley Field. Oklahoma has some really good starting pitching, so it should be fun to see how it all plays out.
Some big games this week from Georgia baseball, and Olivia Sayer has got you covered there. All right, before we get out of here, Kipp, Atlanta Falcons have the 15th pick in this year's draft. They surprised all of us last year when they went and got Michael Penix. What do you want the Falcons to do with that 15th pick, and who do you think the Falcons ultimately do choose with that pick?
If I say what I want them to do, it's going to eliminate that from the realm of possibility. But I'm going to say this, and I'll put the pressure on them. There has never been a draft more set up for the Falcons to take not just one Georgia player, not just multiple Georgia players. They absolutely should. I hope you're listening, Terry Fontenot. They absolutely should take all Georgia players in this draft. If Michael Williams is on the board at 15, don't even hesitate. I mean, you need an edge rusher who can also set the edge and won't be a liability against the run. I know that you guys think highly of Ryan Newsel. Take Jared Wilson at 46. Do not hesitate. Get your starting center for the next decade, hopefully. And, don't even think about it. Like, I think that's a great pick. 118 overall. You need a Mike linebacker. Take Small Munden. I mean, again, boom, you filled another need right there. And I think then you have your 2 7th-round picks. There's a plethora of Georgia players right there. I mean, Nat Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, take a D tackle right there, and take Dan Jackson if he's still on the board. 218, I think, is their pick, and then 242. I say take Dan Jackson with the first one, take one of the D tackles with the second one. And if those guys are off the board, again, you got Arian Smith, you got Dom Lovett. Yeah, you need playmakers at wide receiver as well. There's no reason for you to come out of this draft without all Georgia players. I just think that's the direction that you should go in. This is your chance to win on multiple fronts, increasing your talent, winning the PR battle for once. You haven't done that. I don't even know the last time the Falcons have actually come out looking good in the media. Usually people laugh at draft grades, and then down the road, they go, oh, we got them wrong. That doesn't happen with the Falcons. They get the D's and F's, and then people come around and go, yeah, those were right. We nailed it on those. So turn that around. But I do think that if we're looking at this outside of the Georgia lens, taking a guy like Mike Green makes sense, the edge rusher from Marshall, except for the fact that you lost Grady Jarrett, so you don't have an interior defensive line that's going to keep you from getting third and shorts, which is going to completely negate what Mike Green brings to the table as purely a pass rusher. So I push back against taking him unless you're going to get a defensive tackle in there that can help stop the run.
Ben, I want to throw it to you. I know you're a Falcons fan too, and you were a guy that was defending that Michael Penix pick last year, and now you look kind of smart. So what's the Falcons going to do this year that you are going to be the only one standing on and saying, yeah, man, they made the right call?
We'll see if the Michael Penix pick is smart, I guess. We have a very small sample size to know whether it was smart. We know that they're moving forward with him as the starting quarterback.
I think he would go over any quarterback in this draft. I would take him over Cam Ward right now.
I agree with that. So you know what? Great point, Kipp. I was right for standing behind Michael Penix when they made that pick. All right, Kipp, be real with me. What are the chances that Micah Williams and Jalen Walker are both on the board at 15?
I would say very little. I don't think Jalen Walker gets out of the top 10. I think Michael Williams and Malachi Starks are, if you're going to have 2 Georgia players, that's your best chance.
Well, my fear was that the Falcons are in a spot where they got 2 Georgia guys that make a lot of sense in Jalen Walker or Micah Williams for just, adding some energy to the defense. I think I think the Falcons are going to go defense at the 15th pick.
I think there's a
that it's
greater
gonna be
chance.
I think it's going to be Mike Green, just because I think that it's going to be another situation where even if Micah Williams is on the board, the Falcons go Mike Green, and everyone has reason to complain about it, even though I think very highly of Mike Green. And I think that Kipp brings up a good point. Like, the interior defensive line is not going to get you into 3rd and longs where you're able to take advantage of having Mike Green if you have him. But I do think that Mike Green is a heck of a football player. And the unfortunate thing I think that happens in the Falcons echo chamber is when they do things that go against the public opinion or what the public wants, all of a sudden the player that gets taken, all of a sudden just everyone treats them as if they're the worst player imaginable. I understand that there's sometimes other picks that people would have preferred, but I mean, it's sort of like and I was loud and complaining about the Bijan situation because Jalen Carter's right there, but it's like, I'm not complaining about having Bijan at this point. I love having Bijan Robinson. He's a great player. He's someone that I want to have on the team. So, my encouragement that I would give folks is if they don't take a Georgia player at 15, don't treat the player that they took like he's some bum. He's still a good football player. He's just maybe not the guy that you wanted.
Also, to your point, he didn't ask for this. I guarantee you he didn't ask to play for the Falcons if he's followed this franchise at any point. So it's not his fault. I can't wait to be let down again. They will find a new way to hurt me as they've done for so many years. But you know what? We get to September. I won't be watching them on Sundays. That's just.
I believe in Terry Fontenot this time around.
You mean the Saints double agent? Is that what you're talking about?
That's right.
All right, we're going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who's watching or listening to this after the fact. Go to Dawgs247.com if you haven't already. Sign up. Again, 50% sale going on right now, going to end Thursday night. Stick around for portal coverage, for NFL draft coverage, for Georgia basketball coverage, Georgia baseball coverage. Follow us on YouTube. Follow the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Go to our TikTok, all kinds of good videos, all kinds of good content this time of year. So we will end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.